Welcome back. The President has approved the composition of a power sector reform coordination working group under the leadership of the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. A statement by the Governor of Kaduna State, Malam Nasir El-Rufai, explains that the new working group will incorporate the ongoing efforts of his committee and ensure all power sector initiatives are harmonized. Governor El-Rufai is the chairman of the committee set up by the National Economic Council on Power Sector Reforms and Distribution Company Ownership, DISCOs. President Muhammadu Buhari would receive updates and briefings twice a month on the progress of the new national working group. Other members of the group include the Minister of Power, the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, and special advisors to the President on infrastructure. In November 2019, the NEC constituted an ad hoc committee to determine the nature and extent of the state government's ownership of distribution companies and provide feedback on the challenges affecting the power sector reforms. Nigeria's foreign reserve has been on a free fall, and only recently, figures from the central bank put it at $36.69 billion. As of January the 15th this year, it stood at $38.34 billion, indicating a drop of $1.64 billion in February. Now, this fall is coming when the nation's foreign and domestic debt is on the rise. Nigeria's total debt stock stands at 26 trillion naira as at September 2019. This next report looks at these economic indices and how they can be addressed to enhance socio-economic development.
President Muhammadu Buhari and his cabinet have their job cut out for them in the face of dwindling oil price, which is taking its toll on the foreign reserve.
It is noteworthy.
According to figures from the Apex Bank, foreign reserves dropped from $39.8 billion on November 11, 2019 to $39.24 billion on December 13, after falling by $1.26 billion from $41.76 billion on October 2 to $40.5 billion as at the end of October. Nigeria depends on crude oil for over 60% of fiscal revenue, while 90% of its foreign exchange inflows also comes from the proceeds from the oil market. But oil prices have taken a hit in recent times, and in the face of the new coronavirus currently ravaging parts of the world, the impact on oil market is already being felt.
Since January, there has been consistent reduction in global oil prices, and even when it goes up, the growth or the increase has been really very marginal. What we've had most of the time is reduction because of coronavirus, and most of the countries that consume a lot in terms of crude oil have also been consuming less. One of these countries, perhaps the second largest consumer, is China, and China has been consuming less and less of that. Also note that most countries of the world are also having coronavirus issues around Europe, and some part of Americans have been having issues with coronavirus disease. It's ravaging most countries in the world right now. So this is responsible for Nigeria reduction in foreign reserve, because on one hand, we have issues with price line, which is reducing. On the other hand, we have issues again because output has also been reducing. Nigeria even was asked to do a cut at a time.
The nation's total debt stock came to about 26 trillion naira as September 2019. The comparative figure for September 2018 reveals that the total debt stock rose to 25.7 trillion naira. Blocking leakages and aggressive revenue drive are suggested as key to helping the nation reduce its level of borrowing.
We are digging deeper. We are simply getting an approval to go and borrow more at a time where we don't have the capacity to repay. So the only reasonable thing is that we must live according to the size of our pockets. And then we must also cut down the leakages, because there's so much leakages in the system that if you were to recover half of the money that the Treasurer found out was missing or mismanaged in the 2017 audit, federal audit, we don't need to borrow to fund the 2020 budget.
Nigeria's public debt exerts a long-term effect on external reserve, as both are dollar-denominated. Analysts are hoping that funds from external debt should be channeled towards projects with high returns. Economic policies should also target export promotion and import substitution, as this will increase the level of productivity and economic activities, thereby resulting in an improvement in external reserve, a favorable balance of payment, and increase in foreign exchange earnings.
To examine this subject further, we are now being joined live from our Abuja studios by development economist, Professor Ken Ife. A pleasure having you with us.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, Nigeria's foreign reserves are depleting and analysts are expressing concern. We know coronavirus is impacting oil prices now, but would you say the major causes of the drop in our foreign reserves is due to the coronavirus?
Well, coronavirus is just part of the story because it has affected. If you look at America now, the worst hit in the capital market is the energy companies, which is to do with oil. And then you can see that China is also the second largest consumer of oil, shrinking in their demand because of the coronavirus. And there's a huge impact on the supply chain. Many manufacturers, in fact, you know, if you want to assemble a car, there are hundreds and hundreds of parts sourced from many companies. It's no longer one person making everything. So many of them are actually shut down because all the Chinese that went for Lunar Year are homebound. They haven't come back. So the disruption is felt mostly in the US and then in EU. But having said that, we are hostage to the variabilities in the demand for crude. And as you've seen, it's hit our benchmark price, is well below our benchmark price of $55. And although we have a cushion on the production volume, but with OPEC asking for reduction of 1.5 million barrels, I don't know how long we're going to be allowed to continue at our high production rates. But in any case, if we get hit on both, the impact is obviously going to be felt by the foreign reserves. And our excess crude account is virtually empty. So those two are going to suffer in a way. But make no mistake about this, coronavirus is actually affecting far more things. Apart from the stock market, you have the aviation industry that is in crisis. And we have to look very critically at the potential for more disruption, because 10 trillion tons of goods are moved globally, 3 trillion of which are by air. Now we have challenges on cargo and on passenger traffic, and the whole burden is borne by FAN. And I think we have to look at how quickly we could support this organization that is self-sustaining and is running 22 airports, only 2 of which are viable. And then if you add and in fact, 3 times of its volume, the industries around it that depend on it are about 300% of the company. So the government must do something seriously, even if it means stopping the remittance of their revenue to the thing, and then also make sure that the hospitals that they want to build, 5 hospitals, that there's government support. And they're being owed a lot of money, over 50 billion naira. If they go tough, the aviation industry will collapse. If they stop supporting the airports, we won't have flight to any of the destinations. And the costs have gone up considerably in having to contain the possibility of this coronavirus entering the country. So
okay, Prof, let's bring this conversation home now. In a few minutes, if you could tell us, President Buhari recently sought for the approval of the Senate to borrow about $22 billion. What is your reaction to this?
Now, the thing about the borrowing is we don't have a debt crisis. What we have is revenue crisis, because our revenue to GDP is just about 6%. We need to up that. Average is 18%. VAT, our own 7.5%. Average in Africa is 15%. So we need to up the game on our revenue. And there are so many strategies to increase revenue, which could be subject to another discussion. The impact is this. The important thing is this. If we are borrowing to focus on capital project, which is what Fiscal Responsibility Act 2017 says, then those projects are viable, capable of retiring the loan, and they are focusing on critical sectors of infrastructure and as one of the colleagues said, ensuring that it plays on import substitution agenda, then we have the possibility that this is going to help the country. But there's no way we're going to grow in a sustainable way if we don't invest in infrastructure. It's just going to be managing poverty. We have to grow the economy, and the regime of foreign loan being taken are within 1 to 2%. And that's concessionary. We're not even eligible for concessionary loan right now because we're no longer part of the lowest income countries. But as we're able to get those from development finance institutions, where you know that they can ensure that there is, if the management capacity is the problem, you front load management capacity. Stringent monitoring and evaluation is part of the regime of these development finance organizations. That's where we should be going to get this money, and that's where they're going. Instead of focusing more on bilateral, that's where you have more little or no control of what this money is being used for.
Professor Ken Ife, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. That's all we can take at this time because we have more business stories. We have business news. Nigeria's value of total trade rose 14% to 36.15 trillion naira in 2019 and grew by 10.2% in the fourth quarter of the same fiscal year. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, the annual figure of 36.15 trillion naira is lower than the 36% growth recorded in 2018 when compared to 2017. The foreign trade report also indicates a 28% rise in imports over 2018 as exports climbed by only 3.6%, bringing the trade balance to 58.4% decline in the year. On a quarterly basis, the NBS says Nigeria recorded faster increase in imports in the year, which resulted in a negative trade balance of 579 billion naira, the first since mid-2016. Well, South African businesses and Nigerian investors are ramping up support for an improved trade relations in light of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement scheduled for takeoff later in the year. Executives from the industrial and services-oriented sectors in the South African nation set opportunities in the Nigerian political economy as their focus at the latest edition of the Business and Export Forum organized by the South Africa and Nigeria Business Chamber in Durban. Our South African Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, reports.
The Chief Executive Officer of the South Africa-Nigeria Business Chamber, Diana Games, and the other speakers gave details of what's required to do business in Nigeria, as well as the current state of play, the good and the not so good.
There is a problem around trade facilitation. Let's not shy away from that in terms of Nigeria. There is a problem around regulatory framework, certainty on the regulatory framework, uncertainty on the market. So, South Africa and Nigeria, we need each other. And these are two major role players on the continent.
Nigeria's High Commissioner to South Africa, Ambassador Kabir Bala, gave the opening speech and was on hand to answer the many questions the participants had during the interactive session.
There are opportunities, there are challenges in Nigeria, and those challenges can also be even turned into opportunities. We have a population of 200 million people, and we have challenges with energy supply in the country. I talked about generation, transmission, and distribution. There are challenges there, but we can also look at those things as opportunities for people within the country and also from South Africa to go to Nigeria and invest in those areas of generation, transmission, and distribution.
Among the participants were traders, investors, investment and trade experts, as well as service providers in the South Africa-Nigeria Trade Corridor.
I think it's providing information on the Nigerian market. I think it's sometimes misunderstood. It's a big country to deal with. We try and break it down and tell people what to think about, what to look out for in the market, some of the pitfalls, but also to think about the opportunities, the business culture, how to get goods in and out. I mean, we focus quite a lot on exports at the moment because a lot of exports go from South Africa, into Nigeria, but it's difficult, and it has been particularly difficult over the last sort of 2-3 years.
There's a lot that can be done, and that's why this kind of business environment is important. And there has to be some kind of business-to-business, more business-to-business conversation between Nigerian businesses and South African businesses. We see a lot more of the government-to-government businesses, and most of the time the businesses are not totally aware of the kind of conversations that are going on within government to government.
The goal is doing business much easier, and hopefully the bilateral bodies and sub-bodies aimed at facilitating this will keep up the efforts to achieve this in the interest of boosting inter-African trade. From Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
And that's Business News Tonight. It's back to you, Melinda.
Many thanks, Teniola. Still ahead on the news at 10, Liverpool returned to winning ways after 3 consecutive defeats in 3 competitions. That's on Sports News. Stay with us.